So I guess it begs the question, why are there still so many of them out there? So many old toilets in service? Well, to understand this, we need to think about what consumers look for when choosing a toilet. And we have what we call the toilet hierarchy of needs. Not to make this all psychological or anything, but this is really the result of a lot of consumer research that Kohler has done. When the first 1.6 gallon per flush toilets were introduced in the late 1980s and 1990s, most of them didn't perform well, and consumers lost confidence in the products. And this really was the origin of map testing, was to deal with the fact that toilets were meeting the standard but weren't meeting consumer expectations. And the industry's certainly come a long way, and toilets today are much, much better than they were 10 years ago, but the belief persists that new toilets or low-flow toilets don't work. In today's market, despite our focus on water efficiency, we're all here about that issue, it's not a top concern for consumers. I mean, everyone wants to be green these days. They don't want to pay extra for it, and they don't want it to be any different. Water, I mean, people talk a good game about water efficiency in their home, but really most people don't care. I hate to say it, I'm the water conservation guy, I hate to say it. Saving water is a nice to have feature, but everyone still expects their toilet's gonna work. But they also consider a lot of different factors. The first and foremost thing that people are expecting is that their toilet's not gonna plug. Nobody wants to have guests at their house, you know, and using the guest bathroom and have to go run and get the plunger. So that's the first expectation, that's the primary thing. But then above that, toilets that don't have to be double flushed, bowl that gets nice and clean when it's flushed, the flush is quiet enough so you're not waking your family up at 3 in the morning, the toilet doesn't splash, and then how it's installed, and as well as things like style. Does it meet my decor of my bathroom? Can I get it in the color I want? And things like, is it comfort height or standard height? Those kind of things. There's a lot of choices. And of course, price is kind of at the root of all this too, it's got to be affordable. But the point is that consumers are looking for a product that really does it all. And what we're concerned about is that if we're not testing toilets and giving this data in a meaningful way to consumers, that they'll start to lose confidence as we convert to high efficiency toilets. So what's going on out there, obviously, I wanted to talk a little bit about map testing, and don't worry, John and Bill, I'm not going to say anything negative. We like map testing, as long as it's used properly. And so there's a real interesting, lots of articles, lots of published information about map testing, and I apologize for the photos right after lunch. I guess I shouldn't have thought it. If you can't really see the pictures, John and Bill do have actual samples of the media, if you want. I didn't realize they carry that around with them all the time. So, but from a manufacturer's perspective, map testing is designed really to help water utilities identify toilet models that wouldn't need to be double flushed, models that would be appropriate for water conservation rebate programs. Just about all the water utilities in the US and Canada require a model to be on Veritech's list in order to qualify for their rebate program. So while it's not a required test, if you want to play in the rebate programs, it basically is a required test. The test itself is actually quite useful for product development and quality control applications, and we use it extensively for that. There's variability in the results from test to test, just like any test. So we use a statistically relevant sample when we do our own internal testing. Now, from a standard standpoint, it would be prohibitively expensive to do it that way. So that's a different issue. And there's also ways to reduce the variability of the media, and we do that internally as well. But what I want to stress is that it's not a comprehensive performance test. It only addresses sinking waste. It's all it's designed to do, and that's what it does. And it's also not really relevant beyond a certain threshold, okay? Remember what this is supposed to simulate. It's human waste, and there's really only so much of it any of us will really need to flush. So the question then becomes, well, how much? And the study that's out there, for so basic a body function, there's actually surprisingly little data in the published record about how much waste we would need to flush. But we've done a lot of research on this, as you might imagine. The study that's most often cited was from the UK in 1978, and it talks about an average value of around 130 grams with a standard deviation of about 40 grams. And other medical sources, along with research funded by the pharmaceutical industry, provide similar results. So we're confident about that number. There is some variation due to body weight and dietary habits. But when WaterSense decided to use MAP testing as a performance requirement, this is why they settled on 350 grams. It gives you a safety margin above what people would normally expect to have to flush. So to show what this looks like graphically, the first curve shows a normalized representation of the data from the UK study, averaging again at 130 grams. The WaterSense line at 350. So then if you have two toilets, toilet number one that has a MAP score distribution like this, and toilet number two, okay? So the question is, which of these two toilets is better? And my answer is neither one, because they both can be expected to flush well beyond the expected maximum amount of human waste. Both will meet the consumer's expectation about, sinking waste removal. So both of these toilets are equally good. So that's why, again, WaterSense has a 350 gram pass-fail threshold. Either it's good or it's not. Okay, so this is relevant because when you design a toilet, there's a lot of trade-offs, okay? We talked about that hierarchy of needs, and really it comes down to 5 main areas of focus. The plug resistance, no double flushing, quiet flush, splashing, and the clean bowl. And when you design for one factor, typically you have to make trade-offs. And the art of design is balancing those trade-offs in a way that consumers are going to be happy with. So what's happened is that the reducing water consumption of toilets has also made that balancing act much more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. It's definitely raised the bar from an engineering and a manufacturing standpoint. The concern we have is that with the primary focus on bulk waste removal as qualified by MAP testing, the other areas can be neglected. Well, we certainly don't intend to neglect them, and I don't think anybody intends to. Our concern is that consumers will view HETs as poor performing products if their MAP scores are a little lower than what they've come to expect with the 1.6s. And if that's the case, if they perceive it as a lesser product, they're not going to make the switch. And again, remember what we're after. We're trying to get people to switch out the old 3.5 gallon per flush toilets. So a graphical example of this is a test that we do about bowl rinsing. These are 2 models of toilets, one with a MAP score of 250 grams and one with a MAP score of 800 grams. But you can see the one with the 800 grams is able to get that high MAP score because less water was sent to the rim. So the rinsing of that bowl is not as good. And we know from our consumer data that a toilet that performs like that in the lab is going to get some complaints in the field. So again, it's an example of a design trade-off. Now, I certainly don't want to imply that toilets aren't tested. There's a lot of tests that go on in the standard. MAP is not one of the standard tests yet. It may be at some point. And I got them color-coded here to kind of match up with what I had shown on that other chart. Is you got that 5 primary areas of focus. Some of them, including plug resistance, there really is no standard test for right now. Kohler, and again, presumably other manufacturers, have ways to evaluate all these things, but there's really nothing that consumers can rely on to make a judgment. There's tests for noise. I know for faucets, there's an ISO standard for that, but again, nothing for toilets. So again, there's a lot of holes in this chart, and I think as we work from top to bottom, it'd be nice to start filling in some of those holes.